They say destiny has a strange sense of humor. Sometimes it dresses a hero in the uniform of the humble and hides greatness in the most unexpected places. In the heart of Miami's private aviation hub, every morning the sound of jet engines mixed with the laughter of the rich and the quiet footsteps of a woman named Diana Santos. She wasn't one of the pilots. She wasn't a flight attendant. She was the cleaning lady. Her hands smelled of disinfectant, her shoes were worn out, and her paycheck barely covered her rent. But behind those tired eyes was something wild, something untold. Every day, Diana watched men in expensive suits walk past her like she was invisible. Among them was Ethan Blake, the billionaire CEO of Blake Air Charter. He owned 3 private jets, 2 mansions, and one of the sharpest tongues in the business. Ethan believed in one thing: money defines power. And anyone without it, in his words, was just background noise. "Diana," he once shouted with a grin, "make sure my jet shines today. Got a model flying in from Paris. Can't let her see any dust, right?" Diana smiled politely. "Yes, sir," she replied. He didn't mean harm, but his words carried the arrogance of a man who had never been humbled. To him, Diana was just another cleaner. To her, he was just another man who had no idea who she truly was. Because once, before life took everything from her, Diana Santos was Captain Diana Santos, one of the youngest female fighter pilots in the Brazilian Air Force. Years ago, she had commanded the sky. She had saved her crew from death when her fighter jet went down in flames. "Captain Santos, eject! That's an order!" shouted the radio. "Negative," she replied calmly. "I still have control." And she did. She saved lives that day, but the world didn't reward her. A political scandal forced her out, stripped her of her wings, and erased her name from the records. She left her country, her career, and her dreams behind, trading her cockpit for a mop and bucket. But fate wasn't done with her. On one ordinary Thursday morning, Ethan Blake made a joke that would change both their lives forever. Ethan and his friends stood near his brand-new $20 million private jet, boasting about its speed and luxury. Diana was inside, quietly cleaning the cockpit. One of Ethan's friends laughed and said, "Hey, Ethan, you think your cleaner even knows what those buttons do?" Ethan smirked. "Probably thinks the throttle is a coffee handle." Everyone laughed, but Diana didn't move. She kept wiping the dashboard, her face unreadable. Then Ethan, still grinning, called out, "Hey, Diana, you think you could fly this jet?" She turned slowly, eyes steady. "If it has wings and engines, I can fly it," she said firmly. The hangar went silent. Ethan raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh, really?" he teased. "Tell you what, if you can take this jet off the ground and land it safely, I'll marry you myself." His friends burst out laughing, but Diana didn't smile. "You said it," she replied quietly. "Don't take it back." That was the moment arrogance made a bet with destiny, a billionaire's pride against a woman's buried past, and the sky was waiting for justice. The hangar was filled with laughter, but under that noise, something powerful was shifting. Diana's eyes met Ethan's for a brief second. Calm, unshaken, almost challenging. Ethan didn't realize it then, but in that small moment, he had just awakened something he couldn't control. His friends laughed and nudged him. "You really gonna let her touch your jet, man?" one of them said. Ethan chuckled, waving it off. "Relax, it's just a joke. She probably doesn't even know how to start the thing." But Diana wasn't joking. For her, this was more than a dare. This was a chance to reclaim what life had stolen from her. As the crowd moved closer, Diana gently placed her cleaning cloth aside and stepped toward the jet. The metallic reflection of the aircraft shone on her determined face. Every sound in the hangar seemed to fade. Ethan, amused but curious, crossed his arms and leaned against the railing. "All right, Captain," he said mockingly. "Show us what you got." Diana didn't answer. She climbed into the cockpit, every movement confident and controlled. Her hands moved over the controls like they were old friends she hadn't seen in years. She pressed a few switches, checked the gauges, adjusted the seat, and whispered to herself, "Engines are still engines." Ethan's mechanic, standing nearby, frowned. "Wait, does she actually know what she's doing?" Ethan shrugged, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face for the first time. Within seconds, the low hum of the engines came alive. The hangar vibrated as the private jet's turbines spun faster and faster. Ethan's laughter stopped. His friends exchanged shocked looks. "Dude, she just powered it up!" One of them shouted over the roar. Diana's fingers danced across the switches with practiced precision. The radio lit up. The co-pilot seat beside her was empty, but her confidence filled the void. "This is Captain Santos requesting taxi clearance," she said calmly into the headset. The ground crew froze. No one moved. The air traffic control officer in the tower hesitated, then replied, Captain who?" Diana smiled faintly. "Just clearance, please." After a tense silence, the reply came, "Taxi to runway 15. Clearance granted." Outside, Ethan's smirk had vanished. "Wait, she's actually going?" he said, voice half in disbelief. His friends started recording on their phones. "This is insane," one whispered. The jet began to roll forward slowly at first, then faster. Diana guided it out of the hangar and toward the runway. Her heart raced, but her hands were steady. The moment her palms touched the control stick, it felt like home. The jet lined up on the runway, sunlight glinting off its silver wings. For a moment, she closed her eyes, flashes of her past flooding in, the training grounds, the roar of fighter jets, the wind hitting her face as she soared through the clouds. The memories were sharp, painful, but beautiful. She had been born to fly. And now, after years of silence, the sky was calling her name again. "All right, Diana," she whispered. "Let's see if you still remember." She pushed the throttle forward. The engine screamed. The jet surged ahead with raw power, the ground trembling beneath it. Ethan's jaw dropped as the aircraft lifted gracefully off the runway. It was smooth, clean, professional, the takeoff of an expert pilot. Within seconds, she was airborne, climbing into the blue sky, leaving behind the hangar filled with stunned silence. Ethan's friends shouted in disbelief. "No freaking way! She actually did it!" Ethan stood frozen, watching as his $20 million jet disappeared into the clouds. He had no words, just shock and something else he hadn't felt in years, humility. Up in the cockpit, Diana smiled for the first time in a long time. The sunlight bathed her face as she leveled the plane and gazed down at the city below. "You thought I was just a cleaner," she murmured. "But the sky remembers who I am." For the next 20 minutes, she flew with precision that no amateur could match. Sharp turns, perfect altitude control, calm radio communication. Every move spoke of years of discipline and mastery. The control tower operators were now whispering among themselves. "Who is she?" one asked. "She flies like a pro." When she finally circled back toward the airfield, Ethan was still standing there, eyes locked on the horizon. The jet touched down with elegance, the wheels kissing the runway gently. The engine slowed, and the aircraft rolled back toward the hangar, where silence had replaced laughter. The hangar doors opened, and the jet came to a perfect stop. The cockpit door opened, and Diana stepped out, calm, composed, her uniform still the same old cleaning outfit, but her aura had changed completely. She walked down the steps and looked straight at Ethan. "You owe me a wedding," she said softly. The entire hangar erupted in gasps and laughter, but no one was laughing at her this time. Ethan blinked, unable to find his words. His friends were speechless. The man who once mocked her couldn't even meet her eyes. Finally, he managed to whisper, Who are you?" Diana smiled faintly. "Just a woman who used to fly higher than you could ever dream," she replied. Then she picked up her cleaning bag and quietly walked away. As she disappeared down the runway, Ethan stood still, watching her go. For the first time, he realized that the most powerful people aren't always the ones in expensive suits sometimes. They're the ones who've already lost everything and still found the strength to rise again. That night, as the sun set over Miami, Ethan couldn't sleep. The image of Diana taking off in his jet haunted him. He didn't just lose a bet, he lost his pride. And deep inside, he knew one thing. He had to find her again. That night, Miami's skies were quiet. But Ethan Blake's mind wasn't. The image of Diana's calm face and the roar of his jet echoing into the clouds, replayed again and again. He couldn't shake it off. How could a cleaning lady, someone he barely noticed, start, taxi, and land a private jet like a professional? Ethan sat in his high-rise penthouse, the city lights reflecting off the glass walls. His glass of whiskey sat untouched on the table. He was staring at his laptop screen, scrolling through employee records, trying to find something, anything, about Diana Santos. All he found was a short file. Age 36, position, maintenance and cleaning staff. Employment, 2 years. No details about her past. No education history, nothing. It was as if she'd appeared out of thin air. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "Who are you?" he whispered. For the first time, the billionaire CEO who thought he knew everything realized. There were things money couldn't buy, like humility, respect, or curiosity about the people beneath him. The next morning, he arrived at the hangar earlier than usual. Diana wasn't there. Her locker was empty. The supervisor told him she hadn't shown up since the flight. Ethan frowned. "Did she quit?" The man shrugged. Said she needed time off. Didn't leave a number. Ethan's gut told him it wasn't just time off. He felt like she had vanished. But something about her words, "You owe me a wedding," kept echoing in his head. Was it sarcasm or a challenge? He didn't know. Days passed, but Ethan couldn't focus. His business partners noticed his distraction. "Blake, are you okay?" "You missed the investor call again," one said during a meeting. Ethan forced a smile. "Yeah, just dealing with something." But in truth, he couldn't stop thinking about the way she held the controls, the precision, the calm. That wasn't luck. That was training. So he made a call. "Get me every record you can find on a woman named Diana Santos," he told his assistant. "I don't care where she's from. I want everything, military, aviation, whatever you can dig up." It took 3 days, but when the report landed on his desk, it changed everything. The file was thick, full of documents, photos, and newspaper clippings. On the first page was a headline: "Hero pilot saves squadron in mid-air crisis. Captain Diana Santos, Brazilian Air Force." Ethan stared at the picture. It was her, younger, wearing a pilot's helmet, confidence radiating from her eyes. He flipped through the pages. Awards, medals, commendations. Then, the downfall. A political scandal. False accusations of misconduct during a mission she didn't even lead. A government cover-up. Her name dragged through headlines, stripped of her license, forced into silence. Ethan's hands tightened on the pages. He exhaled sharply. "She wasn't a cleaner," he muttered. "She was a soldier." For a long time, he just sat there. The truth humbled him in ways no business loss ever had. The woman he'd mocked was a war hero, and he, for all his wealth and pride, had treated her like dirt. Later that evening, Ethan drove out to the old airfield near the edge of town. The same one. Diana used to walk through every morning. The sunset painted the sky orange and gold. He found the maintenance shed still open, the faint smell of jet fuel in the air. Inside, sitting alone with her bag packed beside her, was Diana. She didn't look surprised to see him. "Just tired?" Ethan took a few steps forward. "You disappeared," he said quietly. She looked up, her eyes calm. "I finished my job." He hesitated. "You were a pilot. A damn good one." Diana's lips curved into a sad smile. Was past tense. "You saved people. You flew fighter jets." "I also lost everything for it," she said. Her tone wasn't angry, just factual. When you lose your wings, you learn to live with the ground. Ethan looked down. For a man used to commanding rooms full of executives, he suddenly didn't know what to say. "I didn't know," he admitted. "I was arrogant." She finished for him. He gave a short, embarrassed laugh. "Yeah, that." There was silence for a moment. The wind blew gently through the hangar. "I read about you," he continued. "What they did to you. It wasn't fair." Diana looked at him with steady eyes. "Fairness is a luxury for people who can afford it." That line hit him harder than any insult could have. He realized how small his world had been. Built on power, money, and ego, while she had lived through loss, war, and survival. He sat down on a crate near her. "I meant what I said that day," he said finally. "About the bet." She raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" He nodded. "I'm a man of my word." She chuckled softly. "You don't owe me a wedding, Mr. Blake. You owe me respect. That's all." He looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time. Not as an employee, not as a joke. but as someone who had more strength in her silence than he ever had in his power. "Then let me start there," he said quietly. "Respect." Over the next few weeks, Ethan kept visiting the hangar. Sometimes he brought coffee. Sometimes he didn't say much at all. He just listened. Diana, hesitant at first, began to open up. She told him stories about her missions, her teammates, the feeling of flying at 30,000 feet, and the heartbreak of losing it all. He found himself listening like a student. For the first time, the billionaire was learning from someone who had nothing but wisdom, and slowly, something began to change in him. One evening, he asked her a question that caught even himself off guard. "Would you ever fly again?" Diana looked up at the sky. "Not for money, not for fame, but maybe to remember who I was." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then let me help you remember." She turned to him, surprised. "What do you mean?" He stood up. "You brought my jet to life that day. I want you to fly it again, officially this time. No bets, no jokes." Diana hesitated. "You don't need to prove anything." "It's not about proving something," he said. "It's about saying sorry. The right way." She studied his face, searching for the arrogance she once saw. But it wasn't there anymore. Just sincerity. "All right," she said finally. "One flight for me." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the two of them stood side by side on the runway, watching a jet take off in the distance. For Ethan, it was just another plane. For Diana, it was a promise that no matter how many times life forced her down, the sky would always call her back. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could fly again. 2 weeks later, the morning sun lit the Miami airstrip in gold. For the first time in years, Diana Santos stood beside a jet not as a cleaner, but as a pilot once again. The smell of jet fuel filled the air, and the sound of turbines starting up sent a familiar shiver down her spine. Ethan Blake watched her from a few steps away, hands in his pockets, looking nervous in a way he hadn't felt since his first business deal. He'd made 100 flights before, but this one was different. This one wasn't about business or luxury. It was about redemption, hers and maybe his. "Everything's ready," he said. "The jet's fueled and the clearance is approved. You sure you're okay with this?" Diana turned toward him, her expression calm but resolute. "You don't forget how to breathe, Ethan," she said softly. "And for me, flying is breathing." He nodded, unable to find words. She climbed into the cockpit with the same quiet grace she had the first time. Her fingers moved instinctively, flipping switches, checking controls. Ethan sat beside her, this time as a passenger and not a challenger. Inside the cockpit, he watched in awe as she went through every step of the pre-flight, checklist without hesitation. "You really were born for this," he murmured. She smiled faintly. "I didn't just fly planes, Ethan. I lived them." The engines roared to life, the jet trembling with restrained power. The control tower gave the all-clear. "Blake Air 17, you are cleared for takeoff." "Copy that," Diana replied, her voice smooth and professional. A sound Ethan realized he'd never heard before. It was the voice of a captain. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, gathering speed. Ethan's pulse raced. The plane lifted into the air, the city falling away beneath them. Diana's hands were steady, her focus absolute. The sunlight poured into the cockpit, catching the glint in her eyes. For a few minutes, silence filled the cabin, except for the hum of the engines. Then Ethan said quietly, "I think I finally understand what you meant that day." She looked at him. "Which part?" "When you said the sky remembers who you are." He smiled faintly. "Now I do too." Diana didn't respond, but her gaze softened. For the first time, she felt seen, not pitied, not dismissed, but recognized for who she was. Down below, on the tarmac, a few ground crew members watched the jet ascend. One of them snapped a photo and posted it online with the caption, "The cleaning lady who flew the boss's jet is back in the cockpit." Real-life miracle. Within hours, that post spread like wildfire. By evening, social media was flooded with clips and screenshots of Diana at the controls. Hashtags trended across platforms, Captain Diana and the cleaning pilot. News outlets picked up the story. "Miami millionaire humbled by former war pilot," one headline read. Another said, "From mop to cockpit, the woman who defied the odds." By the time the jet landed, a small crowd had gathered near the runway. Reporters, cameras, curious onlookers. Ethan had no idea how fast it had spread. As they exited the jet, flashes went off. Microphones pushed forward, and questions flew in every direction. Mrs. Santos, is it true you were in the Brazilian Air Force? Why did you become a cleaner? Mr. Blake, is this story real? Diana froze. For years she had hidden from the world, from her past, from the headlines that once destroyed her name. Now, suddenly, the world was chasing her again. Ethan stepped forward, shielding her from the chaos. Enough, he said firmly. Give her space. His voice was commanding, the same tone he once used in boardrooms. But now it carried something new, respect. He guided her away from the crowd and into his car. Inside, the sound of camera shutters faded. Diana stared out the window, her reflection flickering in the glass. I didn't want this, she said quietly. I know, Ethan replied. But maybe it's time the world knows the truth. She turned to him, her expression conflicted. The truth didn't help me last time. This time's different, he said. You're not alone. Over the next few days, media interest exploded. Old photos of Captain Diana Santos resurfaced, standing beside her fighter jet, receiving medals, smiling in her uniform. The scandal that ruined her was re-examined, and this time, journalists began digging for the truth. It turned out that she'd been used as a scapegoat for a political cover-up, evidence long buried. Now came to light. Ethan used his influence to help clear her name. He hired legal experts, contacted reporters, and gave interviews of his own. She's not just a pilot, he said during a live broadcast. She's a hero who was wronged. At first, Diana resisted the attention. She wasn't used to being the center of praise. But as the days passed, messages began to pour in from women, pilots, veterans, and people she'd never met. You inspired me to believe again. You're proof that second chances exist. My daughter wants to be a pilot because of you. Each message touched her heart in ways she didn't expect. For the first time, the world wasn't mocking her. It was celebrating her. One afternoon, Ethan found her sitting on the hangar steps, scrolling through the messages on her phone. You've become kind of famous, he said with a smile. She laughed softly. I didn't want fame. I know, he said, but maybe it found you for the right reason. She looked at him for a long moment, the wind playing with her hair. You've changed, she said finally. He chuckled. Guess you could say I learned how to see beyond my own altitude. They both laughed. It felt natural, easy, like the weight of the past had finally started to lift. But not everyone was happy about her comeback. One evening, she received an anonymous email. No sender, just one line. You should have stayed on the ground. Her blood ran cold. The memories of betrayal and politics returned. Someone didn't want her truth out. She showed the message to Ethan, who frowned. You think it's connected to your old case? Maybe, she said quietly. Or maybe some people can't stand seeing me rise again. Ethan clenched his fists. They messed with you once. Not again. I'll make sure of it. For the first time, his power and money meant something real, not for himself, but for protecting someone else. Days later, the Brazilian Air Force issued an official statement. After review, Captain Diana Santos is hereby reinstated with full honors. The world cheered. News channels covered it. Social media celebrated. And in that moment, standing under the open sky, Diana closed her eyes and smiled. The wind brushed her face gently, like the sky itself was welcoming her back home. Ethan approached quietly, holding a small box. Inside, it was a silver pilot's pin, engraved with her name. I had this made, he said softly, for the woman who reminded me that strength doesn't need to shout. Diana looked at him, eyes glistening. Thank you, Ethan, for believing when no one else did. He smiled. You made me believe in more than business. You made me believe in people again. As the two stood beneath the roaring sound of another plane taking off, Diana whispered, the sky always remembers its own. Ethan nodded. And now the world does too. The day began with calm skies, a soft ocean breeze, and sunlight reflecting off the runway like gold. Diana stood beside the same jet she had once been forbidden to touch. It now bore a small silver emblem near the door, her pilot's wings. Ethan had insisted on it. He approached her carrying 2 coffees. "Thought you might need one," he said, smiling. She took the cup, grateful. "You think I still get nervous?" He chuckled. "I think even legends need caffeine." She smirked. "Legends don't get nervous, Ethan. They get ready." They were scheduled for a short business flight to New York. Routine, uneventful, simple. But above the Atlantic, nature had its own plans. As the jet climbed past 30,000 feet, Diana noticed something on the radar. A storm system forming faster than predicted. Dark clouds rolled in like an army across the horizon. The sunlight dimmed. "Miami Control, this is Flight Blake 17, she called into her headset. "We're tracking unexpected turbulence near Corridor 9. Requesting route adjustment." "Blake 17, copy that," came the reply. "You are clear to reroute 20 miles east." She nodded and adjusted the controls. Ethan looked out the window. The sky was turning a deep shade of gray. Lightning flashed in the distance. "Is that normal?" he asked, trying to sound calm. "Storms build fast near the coast," she said, eyes fixed on the instruments. "We'll be fine, just a little bumpier than expected." But the bumpiness soon turned violent. The plane shuddered. The engines roared against the wind. Oxygen masks rattled above their heads. Ethan gripped his seat. "You call this a little?" She didn't answer. Her focus was absolute. "Hold on." Rain slammed against the windshield, lightning illuminating the cockpit in flashes of white. The autopilot began to falter. A warning light blinked red. "Engine pressure drop, right side." "Damn it," she muttered. "We've lost thrust in engine 2. "What does that mean?" "It means we're about to find out how much the sky still remembers me." She disengaged the autopilot, taking full manual control. The jet tilted dangerously to the right. Passengers in the back, and including 2 executives, screamed. Ethan held on to the dashboard.
"Diana!"
"I've got it!" she yelled. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade.
"I said, I've got it."
The wind howled. Lightning cracked across the clouds like splitting glass. But in that storm, Diana's hands moved with a grace born of 1,000 hours in the sky. Her instincts took over, fighter pilot instincts. She adjusted flaps, shifted fuel flow, and balanced the aircraft with precision. Every second felt eternal. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched her, fearless, focused, commanding. "Mayday, mayday," she called. "This is Flight Blake 17. Engine failure on right side. Altitude 23,000 and descending through turbulence." The radio crackled, barely audible through static. "Blake 17, emergency runway is open. Coordinates." The rest was lost in interference. "I can't hear them," she said. Ethan glanced at her, panic in his eyes. "Then what do we do?" She looked at him, calm, determined. "We fly blind." He blinked. "You can't be serious. I've flown through worse with half a wing and no map. Trust me." The cockpit shook again, lights flickering. Diana's fingers danced across the panel like a pianist playing her final symphony. Outside, lightning framed her face, sweat glistening on her forehead, eyes sharp with resolve. In that storm, she wasn't a cleaner or a victim or a name from a scandal. She was Captain Diana Santos, reborn in chaos. Ethan finally understood. This was who she truly was. Minutes felt like hours. The wind screamed louder, tossing the jet like a toy. Then suddenly, a break in the clouds. A sliver of light. Diana seized the chance. "There," she said, spotting a faint coastline through the rain. "If that's what I think it is, we might just make it." Ethan followed her gaze. "You mean runway 09 at Palm Beach Airfield," she finished. "Hold tight." The jet descended fast. Too fast. Warning alarms blared. "Pull up! Terrain ahead!" Ethan shouted. "We're going to crash!" Diana's jaw tightened. Not today. She adjusted throttle, lowered landing gear, and wrestled the control yoke with both hands. The plane dipped, leveled, dipped again. Then the runway appeared, glistening like a silver ribbon in the rain. "Come on, girl," she whispered to the jet. "Don't give up on me now." The tires hit the tarmac hard, once, twice, then screeched across the wet surface. For a moment, it felt like they wouldn't stop. But finally, the engines whined down and the aircraft slid to a halt. Silence. Only the sound of rain against metal. Ethan sat frozen, breathing hard. We made it?" Diana smiled weakly, her voice soft but proud. We landed. That's more than making it. Emergency crews rushed toward the jet. Sirens flashed red and blue. The passengers clapped through tears. But Ethan didn't move. He just looked at her, realizing how wrong he had once been. You didn't just fly that plane, he said quietly. You saved it. She looked away, still catching her breath. I just did what needed to be done. He shook his head. No, Diana, you did what no one else could have done. News broke within minutes. Pilot saves private jet in violent. Miami storm. Heroic woman lands aircraft after engine failure. But this time there was no controversy. No scandal, no doubt. Only admiration. Major U.S. networks covered it. Interviews flooded in. Aviation experts praised her skill, calling it the most precise emergency landing in recent years. When she finally faced the cameras, she didn't speak of heroism or bravery. She simply said, "A pilot's job is to stay calm when the sky isn't." The quote went viral. That evening, as the sun set over the drenched runway, Ethan joined her outside the hangar. The storm had passed. The air smelled of wet metal and freedom. Any regrets? He asked quietly. She smiled. Only that I didn't trust myself sooner. He nodded. I'm proud of you. She looked at him, really looked at him, and said, You believed in me when I couldn't. That's worth more than all the medals I ever had. He smiled back. I didn't just believe in you, Diana. You taught me to believe in something bigger, that people can rise again. She laughed softly. That's what flying is, Ethan, falling and rising again. Hours later, the airfield emptied. The night was quiet except for the distant hum of another departing plane. Diana stood alone beside her jet, hand resting on its gleaming body. She whispered, You and me, old friend. We made it back. The wind brushed her hair, and somewhere above, a streak of lightning flashed faintly. Across the clouds, almost like a salute from the heavens. The sky had tested her one last time, and she had answered. Weeks passed since that terrifying storm over Miami, yet the world still couldn't stop talking about it. Headlines across the U.S. celebrated her. The pilot who defied death. Diana Santos, the woman who flew through a storm and into history. What began as a quiet act of courage had turned into a global story of redemption. Aviation schools started naming scholarships after her. News anchors called her the Phoenix of the Skies. And for once, Diana didn't run from the spotlight. She stood in it, not for fame, but for truth. Ethan Blake's company had changed, too. He no longer flaunted wealth the way he used to. The arrogant businessman, who once judged a cleaner by her uniform, had become something different. Grounded, grateful. At the next press conference, he didn't speak about business deals or profits. Instead, he looked directly into the camera and said, I used to think success meant flying higher than everyone else. But Diana Santos taught me something else. It means learning who helped you reach the sky. The room fell silent. For the first time, the billionaire's words carried more weight than his fortune. Diana, meanwhile, had returned to the air. This time as an instructor at the Miami Aviation Academy. Her first class was filled to capacity. Young women from all over the world came to learn from her, their eyes bright with hope. She began the lesson not with a technical lecture, but with a story. When I was your age, she said, pacing in front of the simulator, I believed the sky was everything. Then one day I fell from it. I lost my rank, my purpose, even my name. But I learned something on the ground. That flight doesn't come from engines or wings. It comes from faith. And if you hold on to that, nothing can keep you down. The room erupted in applause. One student stood up and asked, Ma'am, are you ever afraid when you fly now? Diana smiled. Of course. Every time. But fear reminds me that I'm alive. And that's what makes every takeoff worth it. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hangar, Ethan arrived unannounced, holding a small package. You really can't stay still, can you? He teased. She chuckled. Grounded birds forget how to breathe. He handed her the box. Inside was a simple gold pendant, shaped like a pair of wings. Engraved on the back were 3 words. The sky remembers. Her eyes glistened. You didn't have to? I wanted to, he said. For the woman who reminded me that every story can have a new chapter. She looked at him for a long moment. And what about your story, Ethan? What's next? He smiled faintly. I think I'll stop chasing the sky and start appreciating who's flying beside me. For the first time, Diana didn't look away. She stepped closer, the setting sun casting gold over both of them. You've changed. So have you, he said softly. But I think you just became who you were always meant to be. Weeks later, Diana received an official invitation from the Brazilian government, an offer to return as an honorary Air Force consultant with full restoration of her record. The letter ended with a single line. The nation salutes Captain Diana Santos, the pilot who reminded the world what courage looks like. Ethan watched her read it. You're going back? She folded the letter, her eyes thoughtful. Maybe, but not to escape. To honor where I came from. He nodded. Then let me fly you there. She smiled. You? Flying me. Okay, he laughed. I'll sit in the passenger seat and stay quiet this time. A week later, they stood on the runway again, the same one where it had all begun. The air shimmered with heat, and the jet gleamed like new. Reporters watched from a distance, hoping for one more photo, one last quote. But this wasn't a press event. This was personal. As she climbed into the cockpit, Ethan placed a hand on the door. Hey, he said softly. Thank you for letting me be part of your story. She looked down at him. It wasn't my story, Ethan, it was ours. He smiled. Then take us home, Captain. The engines roared to life, smooth and powerful. Diana's hands moved over the controls, steady as always. She radioed the tower. Runway 14 cleared for takeoff. Captain Santos, ready for departure. Her voice was calm, certain, a voice that carried history and healing all at once. The jet surged forward, gathering speed. The wheels lifted, and once again she was airborne. Miami's skyline glittered beneath her, the ocean stretching endlessly beyond. For a moment, Ethan looked out the window, eyes wide, not with fear but with wonder. You know, he said over the headset. I used to think the sky was just empty space. Diana smiled. It's never empty, Ethan. It's full of the people who dared to rise. They soared higher, breaking through a layer of clouds. The world below disappeared, leaving only sunlight and silence. High above the earth, Diana closed her eyes for a brief second. She could almost hear her old squadron's voices. Laughter, radio chatter, the rhythm of engines from years ago. In that instant, she wasn't flying alone. The sky was full of memories and forgiveness. She whispered, We made it back. The sunlight flared, washing the cockpit in gold. Ethan looked at her. Realizing she wasn't just flying a plane, she was flying through her past, her pain, her redemption. As they crossed into Brazilian airspace, the control tower hailed them. Captain Santos, on behalf of the Brazilian Air Force, Welcome home! Her breath caught. She hadn't heard that call sign in years. Thank you, she said softly. It's good to be home. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. You did it. She smiled. No, we did. Hours later, they landed to the sound of applause. Veterans, officials, even her former co-pilots waited on the tarmac. Cameras flashed, but this time she didn't shy away. She stood tall, saluted the flag, and accepted the honor she had once lost. Reporters shouted questions. Captain Santos, any final words for the world watching you right now? She thought for a moment, then spoke into the microphone, her voice clear and steady. The sky doesn't belong to those who never fall. It belongs to those who rise again. The crowd erupted in applause. That night, as the stars filled the Brazilian sky, Diana and Ethan stood by the jet, quiet, peaceful. He broke the silence. You think you'll ever stop flying? She smiled. Maybe one day. But until then, I'll keep reminding the sky who I am. He laughed softly. And if you forget? She turned to him, eyes bright. Then I'll find someone who believes in me again. He smiled, looking up at the stars. That night, as the stars filled the Brazilian sky, Diana and Ethan stood by the jet, quiet, peaceful. He broke the silence. You think you'll ever stop flying? You already did. The wind swept gently across the runway, carrying the faint hum of another jet in the distance. Diana looked up, the sky above her endless and forgiving, and whispered one last time, The sky remembers.